About the Imam's methodology. If you believe that Imamah is bestowed and divinely inspired, and if you believe that the statements of the Imam are undisputed and right and correct and valid and authoritative in their own right, then you would automatically dismiss methodology, because the methodology of fiqh is about using scientific methods to derive legal injunctions, right? And in our judgment, I said this before, who was the true founder of usul al-fiqh? Shafi'i, right? That Imam Shafi'i was the founder of usul al-fiqh. He developed the methods and the tools and so forth. Now, people in the Ja'fari madhab, they actually say, no, it was Imam Ja'far and his father al-Baqir, the ones that founded usul al-fiqh. Which is fine. I'm willing to totally accept that narration. But I think that puts anyone who claims that in a bit of a tough position. Because it is either that you believe that the Imam is divinely inspired, in which case he doesn't need methods, he doesn't need an empirical evidence. He just needs to say it. He just needs to tell us this is what it is and people follow. Right? It's either that you believe that, or you believe that the Imam is a human being and he's fallible and he needs to use humanly devised methods in order to derive legal injunctions. It has to be this or that. So we've found both conflicting signals in Al-Kafi, and I just had to also share that with you as well. But talking about Imamah in general, I think we need to kind of shed some light here on two things. Number one, most of the narrations about Imamah, again, come from Al-Kafi. And as a book, there are calls, by the way, today in modern day Shia discourse, calls for reviewing Al-Killi. For reasons that I told you about earlier, that the narrations are a little bit discontinued. They don't go all the way to Imam Ja'far. But I think most importantly because the book itself hosts a few opinions that have stirred a lot of controversy within the Ja'fari community itself. Let me share with you one that I think all of us will agree is ridiculous. Al-Qillini narrates after Imam Ja'far, for example, that the Imam said the Quran was altered. That there are surahs in the Quran that are missing. And today, 99% of Shia and 100% of Sunnis agree that this is beyond ridiculous. Right? And that caused many Shia scholars, many Ja'fari scholars to say, well, okay, Al-Qillini obviously was a fallible person, and we reject this narration, and that is why we should not take every other narration in Al-Kafi at face value. It needs some refining and some, not to dismiss the book, but it needs some refining, and it obviously needs some further work. So we just need, also one of the other things is actually conflicting narrations in Al-Kafi itself. Again, I mean, we have the sources, we can share it with you at your request. Between the Imamah of Musa al-Kadhim and Ismail. There are stories that almost explicitly suggest that the Imamah of Ismail was valid. And that when he passed away, the Imam had no choice, Imam Ja'far had no choice, but to bestow the Imamah on his other son Musa al-Kadhim. Which really is a disturbing statement, because it's either you believe that the Imam is divinely inspired, and that the names of all the Imams are mentioned and handed over from the Prophet ﷺ to Ali ibn Abi Talib, right? It's either you believe in that, or you believe that the Imamah is a position of leadership and guidance and custodianship in the community that could go to this person or go to that person. So you cannot combine both beliefs together. And again, that's one of the other challenges that we found in Al-Killini's Al-Kafi. On the other hand, we talk about the Imamah itself, because there is a difference of understanding between Sunnis and Shias, between the madhabs of Ahlul Sunnah and the particularly Ja'fari madhab. And that is, for the Ja'faris, Al-Imamah means a position of leadership and divine inspiration that has been handed over from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the Imam. Now, Ja'faris never make the mistake of suggesting that Imamah is like wahy. It's not revelation. The only recipient of wahy is the Prophet ﷺ. Everyone agrees on that. of course, there are some other Shia groups that would have different opinions, but not the Ja'faris, and certainly not the Zaydis. So, what we're saying is that Imamah for the Ja'fari madhab is a divinely mandated, sort of bestowance that is coming from Allah through the Imams, and it's handed over from one Imam to the son that the Imam is inspired to elect, basically. And the reasoning behind this is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to make sure that the deen of Muhammad, the ilm of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, is preserved. And the only way to preserve it is by making sure that there are people who are still connected to the divine that are able to provide answers to the community and so forth. Is this sort of an accurate understanding? And a consequence of that is isma. What is isma? Isma is infallibility. How can we trust the honor of imamah in the hands of people who can actually make mistakes? So that is the understanding on the Ja'fari side of things. And I will not attempt to invalidate this understanding, but I will challenge it a little bit. Again, just to invite both of us, Sunnis and Shias, to think about these things long and hard. And we have really dissected Sunni theology over the past few months in a successful way, I think, alhamdulillah. While honoring the work and the tradition of those scholars, we have challenged the way we perceive some of their teachings. So here's how we can cast some challenge or put some challenge on these arguments. Number one, if the intention of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to maintain the divine connection through the imamah in order to ensure that the community is not divided, in order to ensure that people have a monolithic understanding of the Quran, if that was God's plan, I can comfortably say it completely failed. Right? If that was the intention of Allah, because the community not only was divided into Sunni and Shia, we have seen divisions within the Shia tradition itself. We've seen differences between members of Ahlul Bayt. We have seen different interpretations within the Ja'fari madhab itself. Right? Which again alludes back to my initial argument of considering madhab to be sort of a fluid institution of human attempt to understand the divine, and not something that is authoritative in and of itself. A scholar says, I believe that Allah wanted us to do things that way, and we have the right to challenge that based on better evidence, possibly, or just accept it. So that is one thing to say about this. The other thing, if Imam was divinely inspired, and if the Imam is infallible, I want you to just put yourself in the shoes of people who lived at the time. Put yourself in the shoes of a man, a non-Muslim, who lived in Mecca at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and Muhammad going around telling people, I'm infallible. I don't make mistakes. How would you take something like that? How would you feel about something like that? Would you say, oh, thank goodness, there's a man here who doesn't make any mistakes, we're going to follow him? Or you will say, what kind of arrogance is that? A human being who doesn't make mistakes? Are you kidding me? Now, in the Quran, and of course, again, some of my brothers and sisters in the Ja'fari fiqh will dislike what I'm going to say, but in the Quran, you see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reprimands the Prophet ﷺ a little bit every once in a while for human choices that he made, and in his judgment he thought it was the right thing to do, because Allah wanted us to go through the experience of thinking and passing judgment and acting and learning from our own shortcomings, kind of thing. So even if you don't accept that Abasa wa Tawalla was about the Prophet ﷺ, you have to concede that وَمَا كَانَ لِنَبِيٍّ أَن يَتَّخِذَ أَسْرَ حَتَّى يُثْخِنَ فِي الْأَرْضِ. It is not appropriate for a prophet to keep prisoners of war until you have established your credibility. Almost reprimanding the Prophet ﷺ that he took POWs after the Battle of Badr. Also the other, in Surah Al-Ahzab, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks to the Prophet ﷺ, وَتُبْدِ فِي نَفْسِكَ مَا اللَّهُ مُخْفِيهِ وَتَخْشَى النَّاسَ وَاللَّهُ أَحَقُّ أَن تَخْشَى. You hide in your heart one thing and you show another. Remember the story when he wanted to marry his cousin Zainab and so forth. وَتَخْشَى النَّاسَ, and you are so fearful of people's opinion, and it is Allah that you should be fearful of. Sounds like a bit of telling the Prophet, well, your judgment in that particular matter was not necessarily correct. Now, if that is Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, imagine the state of followers. If we are able to accept that Muhammad alayhi salatu wasallam, as great as he is, that he was a human being at the end of the day, and he might have made human choices that were corrected by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because that's how we learn, I think it is a tad difficult for us to assume that the Imams who carry the ilm of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam are more infallible than he was. And I think that if the Imams went around telling people, I am infallible, I don't make mistakes, I mean, honestly, I think you could have talked to any of their wives. Your wife will always testify to your true character, right? And with each other we can be one way, but at home we might act a little differently. I'm not suggesting that the Imams are abusive of their wives or anything like that. I'm just saying, when Imam Ja'far comes home and then, he doesn't, clean after himself or take the cup of coffee and put it in the sink. And his wife's like, you're going around preaching to people about good behavior. And you come here and you're not taking care of these small things. I'm sure husband and wife had arguments with each other. Infallibility is such a tough notion. Because you're suggesting that every single thing a man or a woman did was right. And unless we're talking about angels in human life, that is simply not possible. One of the interesting stories here was narrated by, going back to the discussion on Abu Bakr and Umar, Jabir al-Ja'fi, who is a Ja'fari himself, and this was mentioned in Hulat al-Awliya, that Muhammad al-Baqir, Imam Muhammad al-Baqir, when he was bidding farewell to this man on his way to Iraq, he said to them, tell the people of Kufa that I dust my hands off of anyone, and again this is narrated by a Ja'fari narrator of hadith. Tell the people of Kufa that I dust my hands off of anyone who mentions Abu Bakr and Umar in a negative way. They might have had disagreements with them, but I don't think that they would curse them or somehow make the unreasonable assumption that the Prophet ﷺ would surround himself with people that are hypocrites or evil. That is one of the things that always cloud the relationship between Sunnis and Shias, and it's certainly something that at least needs to be cast aside. Alright, so I will talk inshallah a little bit about Aqidah, the creed that Imam Ja'far accepted. And I will make this statement, and some of you will be really surprised. Except for a couple, this is what Imam Abu Zahra says. Except for a couple of articles of the Ja'fari creed, almost every article that Ja'faris believe in is identical to the understanding of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah. So as far as the names and attributes of Allah, the knowledge of Allah, ilmullah azza wa jal, al-kaba'ir, the committing of major sins, Allah's power and decree and the extent of human choice, Shias and Sunnis, they believe in the same things, except for three things. Al-Imamah, I talked to you about this. Sunnis believe that the Imamah is synonymous to custodianship. Like if Imam al-Baqir gave the leadership of the family to his son Ja'far, he was basically saying, you are the one who will take care of the affairs of Ahlul Bayt. Right? This is your job, it is your responsibility. So Sunnis would say, it is not divinely decreed. And they would say, well, okay, was it Zayd, or was it Ja'far, or was it Ismail? I mean, even people in the Shia tradition themselves, they have disagreed on what the Imam was, and if that was Allah's intention, then obviously it didn't work. So we talked about this a little bit, and then the second one is tuqiyya, or taqiyya. Sunnis would say tuqiyya is only permissible, like you can lie about your beliefs and intentions, and motivations and drives, and plans and so forth, in one condition, and that is if you're fearful for your life. It is not, basically a carte blanche for you to lie every time you feel challenged. And this, by the way, this in and of itself is so damaging to Sunni-Shia relations. The issue of taqiyya. The Sunni attempt to explain any Shia cordial behavior as taqiyya is just as disastrous as people on the Ja'fari side abusing taqiyya. Right? It is one of those things. I keep talking like every time I try to reconcile, and I talk to people on the Sunni side. Okay, I know this Shia guy who says this. I've studied with Shia scholar who said that, and there's this Shia book who said this, and they'd be like, that's all taqiyya. They're lying. They're not professing their true beliefs. So basically, if you're Shia, you're doomed if you do, and you're doomed if you don't. Right? If you speak truthfully about what you believe in, and it sounds reconciliatory, following the footsteps of Imam Ja'far, this is not what they believe. No. They're liars. And if you say really antagonistic things, I told you they're all evil. Right? So you have this taqiyya thing. It's like a landmine that was planted in Shia-Sunni relations. And I know that in Ja'fari madhab, there's a hadith that Imam Ja'far said, "At-taqiyya dini wa dini abai." That this taqiyya thing is my religion and the religion of my forefathers. And honestly, even if he said that, considering the kinds of stuff that Ahlul Bayt went through, I can understand why they would sometimes choose not to make their opinions known to everyone else. But I don't think that this is something that could be or should be used in other circumstances. The third one, the third difference in aqidah between Sunnis and Shias is the issue of raj'ah. The coming back or the returning of the occult imam, the hidden imam, al-imam al-ghaib. That one day there's this imam that is hiding somewhere and he will come back, even though many Sunnis would agree with the existence of Imam Mahdi, as Shias believe, but they believe that he will be born in the future. He's not one that was born already and will come back at some point. Honestly, at the end of the day, I find all of this to be secondary differences. It doesn't matter the apocalypse and the end of times and Masih al-Dajjal and the coming back of Jesus and all this stuff. I don't think it really matters that much to us right here in Sacramento in the year 2012. It doesn't really matter that much. These are important things that will affect our spirituality, but is not something that will be really relevant on a day-to-day basis. Some information here on, and we're almost done. Some information here on, again, a hadith methodology that we have found in Al-Killini and some of the other hadith books, and that is for Ja'fari fiqh, for the evidence to be established through tawatur. You know what tawatur is? Am I just speaking to myself? Tawatur is when you have a chain of narrations that is continuous and goes all the way to the Prophet ﷺ, and it's multiple, more than 10 of them narrated by different people, right? So the story cannot be challenged in its veracity. Now, in Sunni tradition, the tawatur has to be established through at least 10 chains, and they have to go continuously all the way to the Prophet ﷺ. In Ja'fari fiqh, tawatur, and again, when we say tawatur, it only needs to lead to Imam Ja'far. It doesn't need to lead to anyone else before him. We have realized that the establishment of a thought or an idea or a hadith as accepted, and if that hadith is not challenged by members of Ahlul Bayt, they consider that to be enough for the establishment of tawatur. And again, that is one of the notions that people on the Sunni side might also have an issue with. One last thing when we talk about the fiqh, the jurisprudence of the Ja'fari madhab. The sources are obviously the Quran, the authentic hadith that is narrated by Ahlul Bayt, and qiyas, basically reaching legal injunctions through analogy. And it's interesting because qiyas is rejected by Ja'fari scholarship because they say, well, we don't need qiyas. Whatever the Imam says is what the Imam says. But interestingly, for the past 1,000 years, because according to Ja'fari understanding, the last Imam is in hiding, so there's no Imam that can tell the community and answer the questions of the community now. So it is actually the Ja'fari community that revived the usage of qiyas throughout history. And Sunni scholars, started learning from that as early as 100 years ago. Muhammad Abdu and Rashid Rida and Jamaluddin al-Afghani, they started reviving the notions of ijtihad inspired by Ja'fari scholarship. So again, you see that on the one hand, theologically, Ja'faris think that qiyas is not an appropriate notion, but realistically it was still used. And then you have al-istishab, which I defined earlier. It's the establishment of truthful statements about law just because they were not challenged. So if it stands the test of time, then it could be used as a source of fiqh as well. I would like to say something, inshallah, here before I go into the summation of the Imam's life. I told you earlier that we believe that the ilm and the knowledge of Ahlul Bayt is situated somewhere in between. It has its own unique quality. It is not 100% Shia as we understand it today, and it is not Sunni either, again with the theological definitions that we've created for ourselves. Think of it this way. The one man who stayed the longest with the Prophet ﷺ was Ali ibn Abi Talib. No one can dispute that. He's the one who stayed the longest with the Prophet ﷺ. He was exposed to the teachings of Muhammad when he was still 6, right? All the way until the time Muhammad ﷺ passed away. And he was the one who learned the most from the Prophet ﷺ. But what happened is, right after Muawiyah took over, did the Umayyads allow the teachings of Ali to spread? They wouldn't. They were cursing Ali ibn Abi Talib on the pulpits of their masajid. So neither Umayyads nor Abbasids allowed the most important embodiment of Muhammad's knowledge to be preached to the public. So by consequence, the knowledge of Ali ibn Abi Talib stayed where? Stayed within Ahlul Bayt. And that's why I'm saying, I think that the community was deprived, the larger community of the Muslims, was actually deprived of a great many of the teachings of Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib. Right? And I think that a lot of the teachings of Imam Ali, because of political circumstances, stayed within Ahlul Bayt. And that's when I keep saying Ahlul Bayt had their own character, their own unique identity, and their own unique strain of knowledge. This is basically what we mean. Summation of life. Now people say that Abu Ja'far al-Mansur basically put poison in the food of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq. Not to suggest that Abu Ja'far al-Mansur was a great person, he was a nasty guy. He was a nasty guy. But I don't think that politically it was a good thing it was the right thing for Abu Ja'far to take the Imam's life. Number one, Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq was actually important for Abu Ja'far al-Mansur. He was able to keep the Shia community together. He was against armed rebellion himself, and you needed a leader like that. If you had someone else who was all activist, he might actually lead the Shia community in an uprising against Abu Ja'far al-Mansur. He did not want that. Number two, he had a very close surveillance of the Imam all the time. He did not need to kill him. He wanted to keep him in order. This is again my judgment. We might be wrong. But our judgment is that it was in the best interest of the Abbasis to keep the Imam alive, because he keeps a tab on some of the other Shia factions. The Imam never rose against Abu Ja'far al-Mansur, and he was not interested in armed rebellion. And finally, al-Mansur had completely consolidated his power a couple of years before the Imam was killed. And there doesn't seem to be a good political reason for him to take the Imam out. One last thought on the occult Imam, the Imam al-Ghaib. So when Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, according to Ismaili sources, they say that he bestowed the Imamah upon his son Ismail. And then Ismail died in the life of his father. So Imamah moved from Ismail to Musa. And of course, the Ismailis are all up in arms about that. So they believe that Ismail didn't die. He did not die. He went into hiding for fear of persecution and is going to come back one day to basically fight Dajjal and so forth. And that end of the story, at least I know Sunnis and Shias, many of them at least agree upon. The Ja'faris, on the other hand, they don't accept that narration. They feel that Ismail never received imamah. It was always Musa, and from Musa all the way to the 12th Imam, and his name was Muhammad al-Mahdi, right? Ibn Imam al-Hasan. And that Imam al-Mahdi is hiding somewhere, waiting for, this is the occult, they call it the occult, or the aqidah of the Imam is hiding, basically. Of course, Sunnis, many Sunnis, except there is no mention, by the way, of Imam Mahdi in either Bukhari and Muslim. So there are many Sunni scholars who question all the narrations about the end of times and the coming back of Jesus and the Antichrist, Al-Mahdi and all that. There are many Sunni scholars who reject that, but there are also many Sunni scholars who accept it based on narrations from Tirmidhi and Abu Dawood and so forth. But again, as I said earlier, I honestly don't think it matters that much what we believe is going to happen at the end of time. None of us probably is going to be around anyway. Or maybe we will. I would like, inshallah, to end the lecture by a saying from the life of the Imam. And this is mentioned in both Sunni and Shia sources. Some people came to him once and they said to him, Ya Imam, Allah says in the Quran, I'm so near and I'm so close, just ask of me and I will give. Right? Ud'uni astajib lakum. We have been making dua for such a long time and Allah does not want to accept our dua. So what does the Imam tell them? He says, the reason you fail is because you ask of someone you don't know. لِأَنَّكُمْ تَدْعُونَ مَنْ لَا تَعْرِفُونَ. You pray to someone that you don't really know anything about. It's like going to a random stranger on the street and asking him to give you something. If you don't know Allah, if you don't know God and His greatness, and you have a relationship with Him, and you pray to Him, and you know His names and attributes and qualities and grace and blessings, and you have Him in your life, and you've served Him already, and you've done things, and you come to a point where you want to ask Him something, or ask something of Him, then it's natural, right? It's like people who are so disconnected from each other for years, and then you pick up the phone and hey, how's it going? Can you give me a ride? How would you feel about that? Oh, this guy only calls when he wants something. They only call when they want something. They never have a natural relationship. But if you have a loving relationship with someone, an ongoing relationship, you visit them, they visit you, at some point if you ask something, if you ask a favor, it becomes natural, right? We treat Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a complete stranger, and we think that we can just barge on Him in our prayer, and basically ask Him for things, and when He doesn't give us what we want, we get all upset and we say, oh, I made dua, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not accept it. I found that to be really a very, very potent statement the Imam made about our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I wanted to thank you for, again, despite the extreme weather conditions out there, coming to listen to what we have prepared for you. And I ask Allah, and it's a blessed time to make dua when it's raining. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among those who know Him and know of His qualities and His attributes, to be deserving of making dua and to be deserving of praying to Him. I ask Him to bring us closer to each other with one purpose, and that is to find out about that which would bring us closest to Him and to serve Him in the best way possible, and to make us loving and caring brothers and sisters in the life of this world, and to admit us to His paradise on the Day of Judgment. I ask Allah to help us accept the differences that we might have with each other, and to agree on the basics and the fundamentals of the deen, and to try to further that area of intersection and make it bigger by the day through dialogue and understanding. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us cast aside some of the minor differences that divide us, and to help us work with each other to serve his community and to serve this society and to help each other and take each other's hands to walk through the difficult and long journey of this life to enter Jannah together. Allahumma ameen. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight. Inshallah, if you have any questions, please do so. We have about 15 minutes before Isha. So inshallah, I can take a couple of questions. Can you use the microphone?
You talked about narrating the hadith. How about the character of the people who narrate the hadith? For example, there's from our Sunni brothers, there's a lot of hadiths from Abu Huraira, for example. And if you study the life of Abu Huraira, there are a lot of horrible news. What kind of character he was. He was actually well known to have 1 million or 100,000 hadiths, and he was well known to generate hadiths for 1 dinar at his time. And he actually, there's a saying that he facilitated, he created a hadith for Azeez that facilitated for him to justify a relationship with a married woman. So, do you have anything to say about characteristics of people and about that particular person?
Let me address this really quick, and that's one of those landmines that I think we plant in the relationship when we make it about one person or one tradition. So and so who narrated after Ja'far was a liar, was a womanizer. So and so who narrated after the Prophet ﷺ was this and was that. I agree with you on one thing, that, and I have made this clear so many times before, and I'm completely unapologetic about it. People on the Sunni side of the divide are very loose when it comes to the acceptance of hadith. I said it. I've said this repeatedly, and I'm very bold and straightforward about it. Sunnis are loose when it comes to the acceptance of hadith. And honestly, the reason, I don't think that Abu Huraira was like that. This is my personal opinion. Because I don't think that the Prophet would bring so close to him someone who is so ethically corrupt to that extent. Because I think that would be an accusation to the Prophet's judgment himself, which I'm not able to accept. However, I feel that because of the Sunni notion that all the companions are honest, by virtue of them being companions, it's prevented the scholars of hadith from studying the lives of the companions. So I will not stand here and tell you that every narrator of hadith was an honest person 100%, or was someone of impeccable morality. I cannot say that. I cannot say that about any human society. Why? Because we have reports of people who lived at the Prophet's time, who were of his companions, who have committed crimes, who have committed fornication, who have stolen money, who have committed murder, right? And some of them were punished at the Prophet's time. So the notion that all Sahaba are udul, I have challenged that notion in some of the lectures before, and I think we talked about it in the Abu Hanifa lecture. But it is precisely because we don't have that history. We don't have enough information. We don't have enough studies on the lives of those Sahaba that one of them you just mentioned, in order for us to pass judgment either way. And that is why I'm not prepared to agree that, okay, maybe the volume of a hadith that Abu Huraira has narrated would raise eyebrows. And I agree, and I can see why that would, I can see why you would feel like that. And I'm not one who accepts every hadith that Abu Huraira narrated. I'm saying this on television right now. There will be an outcry in the community because I said this. But I have to be honest with you, right? But not because I question the character of Abu Huraira. I don't know enough about his character to question it. I believe that Muhammad ﷺ would surround his closest circle of people. They must be reasonable people at least, right? They might not be the best of people, but definitely, certainly not crooks, in my judgment.
He also served with Muawiyah's dynasty.
Well, most of the companions served under the Umayyads. Some of them must have done it because they believed the Umayyads was right, the Umayyads were right. But I think most did because they didn't have other choices. Supporting Ahlul Bayt could have meant your life. And I've spoken about this. There was an element of fear that drove many of those people to make the decisions. Again, that is not the history of Islam. This is the history of a human society that was called Muslims. It is not the history of the deen itself. Let me take a question from the sister's side.
Is it true that there's a hadith about Fatima being the mother of paradise, I believe?
This is Sayyidatu Nisa'i Ahl al-Jannah, yes. That is, again, understood by both Sunnis and Shi'as that Fatima would be the princess of the women of Jannah. Yes, correct.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Brother, first I want to thank you for, obviously you put a lot of effort in gathering the information and coming up with the speech tonight.
Mostly our team, all six of them.
I think you get the credit because you mentioned. I have one point that I'd like to kind of see. If I understood you correctly, when you were discussing infallibility, you mentioned that either one can be infallible, or if we are believing that fiqh was designed by an infallible person, there wouldn't be a necessity for the fiqh. If the person is infallible, if you believe that infallibility does exist, then what's the reason for fiqh? And if there is a reason for fiqh, then infallibility becomes questioned.
Just to modify the statement, what I said was, if the person is infallible, there is no reason for usul al-fiqh. There is no reason for fiqh methodology.
That's correct.
Yes.
But
there's always a reason to have fiqh, no question about it.
But allow me to just give you an analogy that one can be, there could exist infallibility, and since no others, or few others, if I may say, will be infallible, for the reasons of coming up with the same answers, then there becomes a fiqh or a need for usul al-fiqh. The analogy is this. For example, I'm a teacher, and I know about the rules of, let's say, some subject. But in order for the students to come up, or there be a methodology for coming up with the same answers, I can design a set of rules or laws
For them to use it.
for them to be used. So you mentioned it has to be either one or the other. That's what I couldn't understand really well. And I think it's quite possible to have infallibility, at the same time design a rule, design laws, so that those who are not infallible can come to the same point.
Right. No, I think that's a fair point. That definitely is a fair point. And I think that a little bit of a qualifier to that point is that if the imam, the infallible imam, will always exist and be present in the community for as long as he's still around, I could make the argument that there is no reason for anyone else in his vicinity to come up with any methodology, because you can always go back to the imam and ask him straight up, how do you feel about this and how do you feel about that? But I can understand your point when we talk about remote areas and people who travel to other places. There's always one imam at a time. So if you live in Baghdad and there are people who live in Morocco, they obviously need methodology to answer their questions.
Or not only remote areas, brother, just like the way we're talking about, there's only one imam left, according to some beliefs, and that's not apparent now. The elements of fiqh can help guide people to come up with it.
So we need methodology now.
Absolutely.
Since the imam is not
Absolutely.
around.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, now I'm changing the topic here. I have read in other places that Wasal bin Ata also became a student of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq. So, first of all, I just want to know that is there any other position that was taken by either Wasal or Hazrat Hassan al-Basri attributed to the Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq? Did he present some opinion of his own, which was different from these two people?
Right.
The other thing, just one thing, other thing I want to know, is there evidence that Hassan al-Basri has any kind of relationship with Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq? Because he was, I think, about 30, 40 years his senior.
He was
So
much older than-
he knew about him and what was he doing, and because he is also a very well-known person, Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq in Muslim tasawwuf. So both of them are the masters of tasawwuf. So were they in connection with each other? Were there relationships there? And Imam and Hassan Basri also was supposed to got his knowledge from Hazrat Ali, basically.
Okay,
So thank you.
I don't know about them being masters of tasawwuf, but let me address your first question. I have no knowledge of Wasil ibn Atta communicating with Imam Ja'far. I think he communicated with Imam Muhammad al-Baqr. However, in fact, most Mu'tazilis, they publicly, or used to publicly, proclaim that Ahlul Bayt completely agree with their theology. The Mu'tazilis used to argue that, and I don't think it's true. Because I think that the fiqh of Ahlul Bayt rejected many of the articles of the creed of Mu'tazili when it comes to committing major sins and the names and attributes of Allah. I spoke about this. Definitely, Khalq al-Quran, Ahlul Bayt did not agree that the Quran was created, per se. But they make that claim, and honestly, everyone who wanted to get anything done in the ancient world, they used to say, oh, Ahlul Bayt agree with us. So on the one hand, they were not supporting them, but in order to gain any credibility, they would always say, oh, Ahlul Bayt actually, they support the same view. And no one really could tell for sure what Ahlul Bayt felt about things because of all the political considerations that we talked about. Al-Hasan al-Basri, by the way, I said Wasil had communication with Al-Baqr. I meant he was a student of Zayd. I didn't mean Al-Baqr, I'm sorry, that was Hasan al-Basri. Both of them were contemporaries. Wasil and Hasan al-Basri were contemporaries. Wasil ibn Atta learned from Zayd, not Ja'far. And Al-Hasan al-Basri had very brief communications during Hajj with Imam Muhammad al-Baqr. However, you have to understand, these guys lived in Medina, and Wasil and Hasan al-Basri lived in Iraq. So there was, again, very little opportunity for them to communicate. Yes, ma'am?
Translation you said about Abasa wa Tawalla surah, and then if there is a there is a difference between sin and mistakes. You know, according to one translation is made on Abasa wa Tawalla. On that situation, what Prophet did was maybe tarka'ullah, but not a sin. There's a belief that Imams and Prophet, they did not do any sin, but tarka'ullah, that was a mistake.
I'm absolutely.
Are you familiar with tarka'ullah? Okay.
Yeah.
So
if we mean by infallibility the inability to commit sin, I'm prepared to accept that. But if it means not making mistakes at all, I think that's a bit of a more difficult thing to prove. No, I agree with you, and I don't think that anyone on the Sunni side considers the Prophet committed a sin when he did that.
Yeah.
But they would say it was a mistake or it was a shortcoming, but it definitely was not a sin. Yes.
Can you tell a little bit more about Khawarij? A little bit. It was the political group, or it was more also a religious faction?
Khawarij, that's like 3 lectures right there. But in brief, Khawarij was basically a byproduct of the war between Ali and Muawiyah, right? They initially supported Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib so much, and they wanted him to win. They did not want him to make any concessions. And then when he struck a treaty with Muawiyah, right after the battle of Siffin, they considered that to be not only a political or strategic mistake that Ali ibn Abi Talib made, which I don't think it was, but more importantly, it was a theological mistake. Right? They considered that to be a theological mistake. He went against the teachings of the Quran in their judgment. Muawiyah, because they rose against the established leadership, was wrong, and in their judgment was almost like borderline kafir. So if you don't treat them as such, then you yourself, by consequence, become become kafir. Now, it's so funny because Khawarij, for a few years, they would have that theological problem with Ali ibn Abi Talib and his position and his leadership, but they would not carry arms against him. And they would attend the khutbah, and they would be so fascinated with the teachings of Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, and they would cry listening to his khutbah, and he'd say, MashaAllah, this kafir is so eloquent. We've never seen a more eloquent kafir in our lives. So he told them repeatedly, it's okay to disagree with me, it's okay to call me kafir, it's okay to create your own political party and lobby and exercise political pressure on the government. That's fine. The one thing, if you do, I will fight you, is to carry arms against the government. You cannot carry arms. In fact, the logic of Ali ibn Abi Talib became later on the foundation of political philosophy and state society relations and armed rebellion, all the fiqh, mawardi, all this work that was done later, it was based on Imam Ali's dealings with al-Khawarij, because it was really telling and extremely potent. So they later on started rising against Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib. One of them is the one who assassinated him. They rose against the Umayyads. They rose against Ahlul Bayt, was basically equal opportunity rebellion. They rose against everyone, right? And they extended themselves into North Africa. They converted many of the Berbers to the madhab of the Khawarij and went to Oman. And today, the leadership or the established or the accepted madhab in the Sultanate of Oman is actually basically the modern day manifestation of Khawarij thought, which is, what was the word?
Ibadis.
The Ibadis, exactly. The Ibadis. So present day Ibadis trace their theological heritage to the Khawarij. Any other questions? Yes.
You compared sectarianism with a word I wasn't familiar with. What was that word and what does it mean?
Well, madhabism is basically just following a school of thought. So to be Protestant versus Catholic, that's sectarianism. The other guy is absolutely wrong, and he has it all wrong, and I have it right. We're trying not to allow that in Islam, so that we have a disagreement. And it's like within the same Catholic tradition, you have the Franciscans, and you have, possibly another order, but it's within the establishment of the Catholic Church. You have your own understanding, differ in some practices, but we don't excommunicate each other, kind of thing. So it is an attempt to bring that same cordial attitude in Sunni Shia relations. So we're not sects, we're members of the same religion, but we might have more secondary disagreements about things here and there. At least that's what we're trying to achieve. Yes, brother.
So by the time of Imam Ja'far, obviously the Shia Ali group wouldn't have existed, right? There would have been at least a political or some group that would have, because of the fact that took place ahead of his time. So did he identify himself as a Shia? Is there a way to tell?
It depends. I gave a lecture about this. It was a 2-hour lecture about Sunni Shia relations, or what was it? It was the history of Sunni Shia divide. It's on our website. I spoke about such things, and it all depends on how the angle from which you're looking at. Ja'faris would say the norm of being a Muslim from the get-go was to offer love and support to Ahlul Bayt, and anything else is the exception. Right? Sunnis say, well, okay, that's nice and everything, but Tashayyur became sort of a group of its own after the conflict between Ali and Muawiyah. So the Ja'faris, again, to just reword what I just said, if you ask this question to a Ja'fari, they will say that Tashayyur to the family of the Prophet ﷺ, or loving the Prophet and allying yourself with the Prophet's family, which is really what Shia is about, is as old as Islam itself. Which, when you think about it, is not necessarily a wrong statement, right? But theologically, when you ask Sunnis, will say, okay, that's acceptable, but that's not how Shias came to existence. They only came to existence. It was a political divide that evolved into a theological divide. We can even add a third dimension and say there's always the tribal thing. That, Ahl al-Bayt or Banu Hashim and, the rest of the Ummah and every tribe wanted a bit of a stake. The popularization of political leadership versus the confinement of political leadership in one family. Again, there's Orientalists have all kinds of words about this. But let me say this. The entire Ummah, I think, would have been, this is a bit of an extreme statement that some of you will not like, but I think that the entire Ummah would have been what Sunnis today consider moderate Shia. If it wasn't for one thing. If it wasn't for the rise of Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari and his work with the Abbasis and the Hanbalis to create what we call today Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. The madhab that was sponsored, and I'm not saying this by way of casting doubt, by the way. I'm just tracing the historical origins. The madhab that was sponsored by the Abbasis in order to bring the Ummah together after centuries of rebellion and centuries of divisions. If it wasn't for the fact that the Umayyads and the Abbasids were so harsh and so brutal in their methods, I think there would have been a much more widespread support for Ahlul Bayt among the Muslims, because that was the norm. That's what the Quran clearly states.
One of the things that I struggle with when you read this, all of these history is, were you alive at that time? What position would you have taken? This
It's an important question.
Yeah, I struggle with it, and it's Allahu Alam. It's so in that sense, I think we are forever till the day of Qiyamah. We are going to be struggling with this. The Ummah is torn apart simply because of that. The political struggle and the ostracization of the family of the Prophet.
Right, and there's we cannot answer that question because we were not there. And honestly, I wouldn't want to be there. For a sword to be put on my neck and to be asked whether I love Ahlul Bayt or not, I mean, whatever your answer is, it's going to be problematic. So I wouldn't want to go through the trial, but what I can testify to is my existence here today. If we have the audacity to say that a madhab, a school of thought, is just a school of thought, and as long as we agree, all Muslims pray 5 times a day, all Muslims fast in Ramadan, all Muslims face the Kaaba, we accept the Quran as valid, we have 95% disagreement what's haram and what's halal, and there are some issues of aqeedah and some issues of fiqh that we have disagreements, I am willing to include that in the fluidity of the madhab and say, okay, if you worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through that particular madhab, it's okay. And I worship Allah through this madhab, it's okay. And the Zaydis are doing it like that, it's okay, as long as the primary foundations of the deen are preserved. But once you start saying crazy stuff, I don't pray 5 times a day because my soul visits the Kaaba. 5 times every day, and I pray there with my soul, which, some radical Sufis say, I'm not prepared to accept that. Because that destroyed the very foundation. There has to be an area of intersection, an area of commonality. And as long as that area is there, and it's the fundamentals, the basics, we can agree on that and try to expand it gradually through this dialogue. I'm sure, what's your name, brother?
I'm Muhammad.
If I talk with Brother Muhammad on a daily basis for an hour on the phone, he is Shia, that's my guess. And as I said before, I was born into the intellectual construct that's called Sunni Islam. But if we talk to each other for an hour every day, for the next year, I promise you, we will both come to some agreement that is neither Sunni nor Shia. Right? It'll be skewed to my side or his side, it doesn't matter, but that dialogue will produce something good. And that's what this lecture series is about.
May I have one more question?
I think that will be the last question.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and thank you very much, brother, and I again appreciate the last chance. And my knowledge about Islam especially is very limited. especially on the subject of infallibility. This brother brought up the issue about Abasa wa Tawalla, and you did mention a few things that some places in Quran, maybe there is issues about how Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam made some errors. However, let us just, and this is, I just want to call your attention and everybody's attention to this for future consideration and maybe further studies. And definitely I am going to be doing some studies of my own on this. By the virtue of just logic, if God were to send any prophet, not just Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that prophet or the Imam were to be other than infallible, then that put doubts in people's followers. By logic, if I am supposed to follow a divine law, that divine law better be infallible, just by logic. Or else, I cannot 100% say that the prophet or this other prophet or this Imam is following the correct path. So by virtue of logic, it appears to me that infallibility must be there, and not only that, if there are some errors or some issues mentioned in the Quran, there must be other reasons for bringing that up. It's just I just want to bring this up for further studies and further consideration.
Right. Right. Thank you. This is, and again, I agree with you as long as we define infallibility as someone who doesn't commit sins.
No, I'm defining infallibility
As someone who doesn't make mistakes whatsoever. I'll tell you one thing. If I see someone in front of me that works so hard, I mean, if fallibility means lying, for example, I will never take that person serious. I mean, there are sins that a prophet cannot commit. A prophet cannot sleep around and come talk to me about chastity, right? A prophet cannot be a liar and come talk to me about truthfulness and veracity. A prophet cannot be a crook and steal money from other people and come talk to me about fair-handedness. A prophet cannot have certain qualities. We have to agree on that. Allah would not have selected someone with qualities such as that. However, if someone works so hard and with established credibility, and every once in a while makes a very minor mistake, that will not cause me to doubt the intentions of that person or to stop following him. Right? If by that same token the community judged me as their leader based on my mistakes, I'm gonna be doing something else. A long time ago, people know that I make mistakes. I, for example, raise my voice. I lose my temper every once in a while. Right? I rush to judgment every once in a while. I get an email and I'm so upset, and I type the response, click send. And then once I click send, I'm like, oh my God, why did I do that? And then 5 minutes later, I send an apology email. If people judge me based on my faults, I would have been done. But there are things, if I did, I would get fired immediately. See, there's a difference between the type of mistake. And honestly, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and now we're going to talk about the extent of human choice, if Allah decrees, He has decreed on you that you don't make mistake, not a single one, why should you be deserving of His heaven? If you were not put through the test, you are genetically determined not to make any mistake. What kind of effort have you exerted then? Right? God wants to see us going through the test and being challenged and being put in situations where we need to weigh our options and make a decision against the odds. And that's what defines us as human beings. That's what defines righteousness. So if we believe in human choice, if we believe in the amana that God has given us, which is our ability to choose, right? Then we, by consequence, we also have to believe that prophets, as human beings, they must be put through choices. Remember Musa alayhi salam? When Allah is trying to send the message to him and he keeps saying, why don't you appoint my brother Harun? Right? He's more eloquent than me. He didn't want it because it was too much work. Okay, Ya Allah, I killed one of those Egyptian guys at some point, and you know what, if I go there, they're going to be waiting with a big party just waiting for me to avenge this guy. So he wasn't sure how he's going to behave. And then when he comes back from Mount Sinai, what does he do to his brother? He grabs his brother from his hair, drags him around. He says, how could you let this happen? Now, if you ask me, that is not behavior becoming of a prophet. He made a mistake right then and there. He punished his brother for a mistake he has not committed. Sulaiman alayhi salam, the Quran talks about him making bits of mistakes, but it is not a mistake that affects your credibility, that affects the respect that people have for you, and I think that's where I draw the line. 95% you would not make such mistakes, and there are mistakes that are unforgivable, but a shortcoming here and there, I think, will not destroy the credibility that you have in our hearts as your followers. Thank you so much. I have to conclude the lecture for tonight. Again, I appreciate your patience. We're going to go upstairs, inshallah, for prayer. There's more food, by the way, in the community center if you'd like to help yourselves. As-Sadiq.